Romantic fantasy, better known as Romantasy, has taken over the book world, with a mix of romance, fantasy elements, and air quotes, spicy relationships. It's an undeniable force in publishing. Every few months, a new Romantasy dominates the best selling lists. TikTok explodes with praise, and readers rush to swoon over the next dark prince or brooding fey warrior. Yet, despite its success, the genre feels like it's stuck in a creative rut. Every Romantasy book seems to blend together, using the same overused tropes, predictable character archetypes, and formulaic plot instead of offering something fresh. There's no fantasy worlds and compelling stories. Many of the books prioritize romance above all else, to the detriment of everything else, including the fantasy itself. I'm Will, I host the Bold Book Geek. Check out membership options on this channel and Patreon for exclusive content you'll never get anywhere else. Like, sub, and tell me what you think in the comments below, because I'm genuinely curious with this one. Let's have a conversation. One of the biggest issues with Romantasy is how often it recycles the same storylines. If you've read even a handful of these books, you start to notice a pattern. A young woman, usually with a tragic past, is special, though she doesn't know it. She gets pulled into a magical situation either through secret royal heritage, unexpected powers, or a destiny she never asked for, or just happens to show up. There's a brooding, powerful love interest who is probably immortal, a fairy, or a dark prince, or God knows what else. The heroine and love interest go through drawn-out enemies to lovers arc that's meant to feel natural but often just feels forced. Lots of angst. There's a war or rebellion that happens in the background, but the romance overshadows it. The heroine miraculously becomes super powerful at the right time for a climax, and there are many of those in this book, in these types of books lately. Lots of climaxes. The story ends with a vague hint at a sequel, despite wrapping up everything in the most predictable way possible. Does this sound familiar? It should, because the vast majority of Romantasy books follow the exact same formula. Even when a book tries to introduce new world-building elements, the core plot structure remains unchanged, making it difficult to differentiate one book from another. They all become this weird, bland soup. If there's one character type that Romantasy authors refuse to let go of, it's the brooding, morally grey love interest. You know the one. He might be centuries old, or a young nobleman, or a warrior, or a military leader, or just an elf with abs, or a fairy. Astonishingly attractive and tortured by his dark past, he is often rude, arrogant, and most likely manipulative. But the heroine and the readers are expected to find him insatiable. This kind of love interest was compelling the first few times in early 2000s young adult novels, but at this point it's beyond predictable. There's no variety. Why is every Romantasy love interest either a fabled prince, a demon lord, or a cursed warrior with trust issues? Why does every single one have the same deep voice, square jaw, and shadowy past? Worse still, many of these love interests exhibit outright toxic behavior, lying, controlling, and manipulative. But the book frames it as romantic. Readers are meant to believe that he's just misunderstood and only the heroine can heal his broken heart. It's lazy writing, and it prevents real meaningful character development. To quote that great TikTok video, she has to choose between boring tanned Caucasian and boring pale Caucasian. In this case, they might have pointy ears, or wings. Fantasy should feel immersive, transporting readers to a new, richly detailed world filled with magic, history, and culture. Unfortunately, many Romantasy books treat world building as an afterthought. Instead of creating something truly unique, they slap together a generic medieval-esque setting, sprinkle in some vague magic system, and call it a day. The kingdoms are barely fleshed out beyond good or evil. The magic system often lacks logic or limitations, magic just exists. Societies and politics are non-existent or reduced to one-dimensional conflicts, that's just about some warring kingdom and a Romeo and Juliet moment. The world serves no real purpose beyond a backdrop for romance. When a fantasy novel prioritizes romance above everything else, it risks making the setting feel hollow. A great fantasy should balance both elements. Romance should enhance the story, not replace the depth and complexity of the world itself. Romantasy has shifted towards prioritizing spice, explicit romantic scenes, over strong storytelling. While there's nothing wrong with a well-written romance, Anne Rice's Sleeping Beauty trilogy, it becomes a problem when the books stop focusing on plot or character development in favour of cramming in as many steamy scenes as possible. And when an author replaces meaningful world building and compelling story with endless spicy moments, the book starts to feel more like a fantasy-skinned Milnes and Boom novel rather than an actual fantasy novel with romance. Romance should have, maybe it should have the element to the story, but not the entire story. There needs to be something to back up the prince going down on the heroine. Let's be real. Every romantasy protagonist is marketed as a strong female lead, but in reality they're often anything but. They all tend to fall into the same uninspired pattern. She's not like other girls, yet she has no real defining personality and is a complete blank slate for the reader to project themselves onto and imagine themselves in that position. Many positions. Lots of positions. Going by one that I attempted to read out of morbid curiosity recently. Or they're a self-insert for the writer and it's just wish fulfillment fiction. She's special in some way, often due to hidden powers or secret heritage. Or just shows up and just happens to be, excellent with a sword, but her weakness is tripping in front of muscular men. She spends most of the book reacting rather than making active choices. Her strength usually boils down to being sarcastic or stubborn. Instead of giving readers heroines with real flaws, growth, and depth, many romantasy authors refer to the same default, to the same tired template. A truly strong heroine isn't just physically powerful or sassy. She has agenda, intelligence, emotional complexity, and isn't just there for some way for the reader to project themselves onto. Tropes are a natural part of any genre, but when they're used without any real innovation, they become predictable and dull. Romantasy is guilty of recycling the same tropes without offering any new takes on them. Enemies to lovers, but they're usually forced and underdeveloped. Love triangles. Let's not go back to Twilight, please. Fated mates / soulmates, removing any real romantic tension. The chosen one heroine who conveniently becomes powerful just at the right time. And the convoluted and conveniently timed war / rebellion that exists purely to create artificial stakes. Instead of subverting these cliches or using them in a fresh way, most romantasy authors rely on them as a crutch, making the story feel predictable. Romantasy could be something good, but most of it, at its best, it just doesn't work. It's become saturated with repetitive stories, flat characters, and lazy world building. For romantasy to evolve, authors need to take more risks. They need to create deeper, more unique worlds, craft love interests with real depth beyond hot and brooding, and write heroines who feel like real people rather than self-inserts. Until then, romantasy remains stuck in a cycle of mediocrity, repeating the same stories with the same characters for the same audience, over and over again. Now, I'm going to ask you a question if you've made it this far. Do you think there are any books that break the mould? Tell me what you think in the comments below.